The great hall of the Galactic Council stretched out like a vast ocean of light and color. Thousands of beings from across the known universe had gathered here today, their voices creating a gentle hum that echoed off the crystal walls. Some had skin that glowed blue in the artificial starlight, others had 6 arms or eyes like silver mirrors. But despite their differences, they all shared the same look of pride on their faces. Ambassador Veltar stood at the center podium, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the floor. His people, the Centauri, had been among the first to sign the Great Treaty 500 years ago. Now, as he looked out at the assembled crowd, he felt a deep satisfaction in his chest. "My friends," he began, his voice carrying easily across the massive room. "Today we celebrate something that our ancestors could never have imagined. 500 years of civilized warfare." A cheer went up from the crowd. Representatives from the Corvian Empire nodded their approval, their gray skin rippling with pleasure. The insect-like delegates from the hive worlds clicked their approval in perfect unison. Even the usually stern representatives from the military alliance allowed themselves small smiles. Veltar raised his hand and the hall fell quiet. "Our forefathers fought like wild animals. They destroyed entire planets. They tortured prisoners. They killed civilians without thought. They turned war into a horror that consumed everything in its path." The crowd murmured in disgust at the thought. Such behavior was unthinkable now. "But we evolved," Veltar continued. "We became better. We created the Universal War Crimes Treaty, and with it we brought honor to conflict. Now, when our peoples disagree, when resources must be fought over, when territory changes hands, we do so with dignity." He gestured to a massive golden plaque on the wall behind him. Written in 300 different languages were the basic rules that governed all warfare in the galaxy. Military targets only. Prisoners must be treated with respect and care. Civilians are never to be harmed. Cultural sites must be protected. No torture. No biological weapons. No targeting of the young or elderly. War still exists, Veltar admitted. We have not ended conflict entirely, but we have made it civilized. We have removed the cruelty, the needless suffering, the barbaric practices that once made war a nightmare. Our battles are fought between soldiers who respect each other. Our prisoners are fed and healed. Our civilians live in safety, knowing that even in defeat they will be protected. The applause was thunderous. Representatives from species that had been enemies for centuries stood and clapped together. War had become almost like a sport, still serious, still deadly for those who chose to fight, but clean and honorable. 3 months later, the mood in the council hall was much quieter. Only a few dozen delegates were present for what had become a routine procedure, the admission of a new species to the galactic community. The humans had arrived in ships that looked crude compared to the sleek vessels of the established powers. Their technology was functional but unimpressive. Their weapons were simple projectile systems and basic energy weapons. Their leader, Ambassador James Mitchell, was a middle-aged man with graying hair and kind eyes who spoke in a soft, measured tone. "The human race seeks membership in the Galactic Council," he said simply. "We wish to trade with your peoples, to learn from you, and to contribute what we can to galactic peace." The admission process was straightforward. The humans provided samples of their technology, which was deemed adequate but unremarkable. They shared their history, which showed the typical pattern of a species learning to control its violent impulses as it reached for the stars. They demonstrated their understanding of basic diplomatic principles. Finally came the most important part, the signing of the Universal War Crimes Treaty. "Do you understand that membership in this council requires your absolute commitment to civilized warfare?" asked Councillor Zexanel of the Corvian Empire. Mitchell nodded. "We do." "You agree that civilians must never be targeted?" "We do." "You agree that prisoners must be treated with dignity and care?" "We do." "You agree that cultural sites must be preserved, that biological weapons are forbidden, that torture is never acceptable?" "We do." The questions continued for an hour, covering every aspect of the treaty. Mitchell answered each one without hesitation, often asking thoughtful questions about specific implementations. His delegation took careful notes and discussed several points in detail. When they were finished, Mitchell took the signing stylus in his hand. The device would encode his genetic signature into the treaty, binding humanity to its terms for all time. "Before you sign," Veltar said with a friendly smile, "do you have any final questions?" Mitchell paused, thinking. "Just one. The section about protecting young ones, does this apply during occupation scenarios?" "Of course," Zexanel replied. "Children are never to be harmed regardless of circumstances. If an occupied territory has young ones present, they are to be protected, fed, and cared for until they can be safely returned to their families. Mitchell smiled and nodded. That sounds very reasonable. He pressed the stylus to the treaty, and his signature glowed briefly before becoming permanent. Welcome to civilized space, Veltar said, shaking Mitchell's hand warmly. Your species seems quite reasonable and peaceful. I'm sure you'll fit in well here. The other delegates murmured their agreement. The humans appeared to be just another ordinary species, perhaps a bit primitive in their technology, but with good hearts and a clear understanding of proper behavior. As the ceremony ended and the delegates began to file out, none of them thought to ask Mitchell about human mothers. It seemed like such an unimportant detail at the time. They would learn otherwise soon enough. Commander Thexanel stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the blue and green world grow larger on the viewing screen. New Haven looked peaceful from space, a single continent surrounded by vast oceans, with small cities scattered across rolling hills and farmland. The human colony was only 20 years old, home to about 50,000 people who had come here to build a quiet life far from Earth. Sir, we're receiving their surrender signal, reported his communications officer. Thexanael nodded with satisfaction. The humans had been smart enough not to fight a hopeless battle. His fleet of 12 ships had overwhelmed their 3 small defense vessels within minutes. No lives had been lost on either side, exactly the kind of clean, professional operation the Galactic Council expected. Very good. Begin landing operations. Remember, we follow the treaty to the letter. His soldiers were well trained in proper occupation procedures. They had studied the Universal War Crimes Treaty since childhood and knew every rule by heart. As their transport ships descended toward New Haven's main city, each soldier carried a copy of the Civilian Protection Guidelines in their armor's data storage. The Human Defense Force had gathered in the central square, their weapons placed in neat piles as required by surrender protocol. They looked nervous but not terrified. Their commander, a woman named Captain Roberts, stepped forward as Thexanael's shuttle touched down. I hereby surrender this colony to Corvian forces, she said formally. We request that all civilians be treated according to Galactic Council guidelines. Your request is granted, Thexanael replied with equal formality. All non-military personnel will be protected and cared for during our occupation. His soldiers immediately began the process of securing the city. They moved through the streets in organized groups, politely asking civilians to remain in their homes while they established control. Medical teams checked on the elderly and sick, ensuring they had adequate supplies. Food distribution centers were set up to make sure no one went hungry. Everything was proceeding perfectly until Lieutenant Kexvar approached with a problem. Sir, we need a command center, but all the government buildings are too small for our equipment. The only structure large enough is the education facility. Thexanael frowned. The school was a large, modern building in the center of town, with multiple rooms and strong walls that could easily house their command equipment. But there was a complication. How many young ones are inside? He asked. 847, sir. Ages 5 through 16. This required careful thought. The treaty was very clear: children were never to be put in danger. But it was also clear that they needed proper facilities to run the occupation efficiently. Thexanael reviewed the guidelines in his mind. The children could be safely contained in one area of the building while his forces used the rest. They would be protected, fed, and cared for. It was well within treaty bounds. Proceed, he ordered. But establish a secure perimeter around the educational facility. I want medical staff on site at all times. The young ones are to be treated as honored guests, not prisoners. The operation took 3 hours to complete. Corvian soldiers gently escorted the children to the school's large gymnasium, which had been quickly converted into a comfortable living space. Soft bedding was brought in along with games and entertainment systems. The school's kitchen staff, working under Corvian supervision, prepared familiar meals for the children. Dr. Yexlon, the fleet's chief medical officer, personally examined each child to ensure they were healthy and unharmed. Most were scared but trying to be brave. Some of the younger ones were crying for their parents, which broke his heart, but he knew this was temporary. As soon as the humans agreed to Corvian terms, all the children would be returned safely to their families. Sir, his communications officer called from the school's main office, which now served as their command center. Earth government is requesting a status report on the occupation. Thexanael reviewed his notes before responding. Everything had gone exactly according to plan. No casualties on either side. All civilians accounted for and protected. Military objectives secured. It was a textbook operation that would probably be used as a training example for future commanders. Send this message, he dictated. New Haven colony has been successfully occupied by Corvian forces. All military objectives secured without casualties. All civilians, including 847 young ones ages 5 through 16, are safe and under our protection as specified in Universal War Crimes Treaty Article 7. They are receiving proper food, medical care, and accommodation. All individuals will be returned unharmed upon resolution of current territorial dispute. He paused, then added, Please advise Earth government that we are prepared to begin negotiations for peaceful transfer of New Haven system to Corvian administration. We look forward to resolving this matter quickly and returning to normal diplomatic relations. The message was transmitted using standard diplomatic channels. Thexanael expected a reply within a few days, probably a request for negotiations or perhaps a counteroffer regarding the disputed territory. These things usually took time to work through proper channels. What he did not expect was silence. 3 days passed with no response from Earth. 5 days. A week. Sir, his communications officer reported on the 8th day, we're receiving multiple transmissions from Earth, but they're not coming through diplomatic channels. They appear to be civilian communications, all asking about the status of specific children. Thexanael frowned. Civilian communications? What kind of civilians? Mostly from individuals identifying themselves as parents of the young ones we're protecting, sir. The messages are intense. Show me. The first message appeared on his screen, sent by someone named Emily Watson. Her words were simple but carried a weight that made Thexanael uncomfortable. You have my daughter Lucy. I want her back. Now. The second message was from Margaret Thompson. My son David is 10 years old. If you hurt him, there will be consequences. Dozens more followed, all with the same tone, not angry exactly, but filled with a cold determination that Thexanael had never encountered before. Sir, we're also detecting ships leaving Earth orbit. Multiple vessels, unregistered, heading this way. Thexanael stared at the tactical display in confusion. This wasn't how civilized species were supposed to respond to proper occupation procedures. Something was very wrong. Dr. Emily Watson was staring at plant DNA sequences on her computer screen when her assistant burst into the lab. The young man's face was pale, and his hands were shaking as he held out a data pad. Dr. Watson, there's been an attack on New Haven Colony, he said quietly. Emily felt her heart stop. Her 10-year-old daughter Lucy was on New Haven, attending the colonial school while Emily finished her research on Earth. Lucy loved drawing pictures of the alien flowers that grew in the colony's gardens. She had sent her mother a picture just last week showing a purple bloom that looked like a butterfly. What kind of attack? Emily asked, her voice steady despite the fear growing in her chest. Corvian occupation. They say all civilians are safe, but... He handed her the data pad. Emily read the official message from the Corvian commander. 847 children were being held in the school. They were safe, well-fed, and protected. They would be returned when negotiations were complete. Emily read the message 3 times. Then she set down the data pad, walked to her desk, and began making phone calls. The first call was to her supervisor. I'm taking emergency leave, she said simply. The second call was to Margaret Thompson, whose son David was also on New Haven. Margaret was a former Marine sergeant who now worked as a security consultant. Emily had met her at a parent meeting 6 months ago. You saw the news? Margaret asked without introduction. Yes. What do? We get them back, Margaret said. Her voice was calm, but Emily could hear something cold and hard underneath. Meet me at Transport Station 7 in 2 hours. Bring whatever you can carry. Emily's third call was to her neighbor Patricia Davies, an engineer whose daughter Sarah was among the children. Patricia had designed weapons systems for the military before becoming a civilian contractor. I already heard, Patricia said before Emily could speak. I'm packing now. Do you know anyone else? I'm making a list. By the time Emily reached the transport station, she wasn't alone. Dozens of women were already there, all with the same determined expression on their faces. Some carried suitcases, others just small bags. A few had brought tools or equipment that Emily didn't recognize. Margaret stood on a cargo container, addressing the growing crowd. She was a tall woman with short gray hair and scars on her hands from her military service. When she spoke, people listened. I know what you're all thinking, she said. The government will handle this. The diplomats will negotiate. The military will sort it out. But I want you to understand something. Our children are sitting in a school gymnasium right now, scared and confused, waiting for someone to bring them home. How long are you willing to let them wait? A woman near Emily called out, "What can we do? We're not soldiers." Margaret smiled, but it wasn't a happy expression. "Some of us are. And the rest of us are going to learn. Fast." The crowd grew throughout the day. Women arrived from across Earth and from colonies throughout human space. They came on commercial transports, private ships, even cargo haulers. News networks started calling them concerned mothers, but Emily could see they were becoming something else entirely. Dr. Helen Clark arrived on the third day. She was a military psychologist who specialized in studying alien behavior. Her twin sons were among the captives. She took one look at the growing organization and immediately requested a meeting with Margaret. "The Corvians think they're being reasonable," she explained to the leadership group. "In their culture, this kind of occupation is normal. They'll treat the children well and expect us to negotiate calmly for their return. They have no idea what they've actually done." "What have they done?" asked Patricia, who was busy sketching weapon designs on a tablet. Helen's expression was grim. "They've activated something that evolution built into human mothers millions of years ago. Something that doesn't care about treaties or civilization or proper behavior." Margaret nodded slowly. "How long before they expect negotiations to begin?" "Could be weeks. Maybe months. They're not in any hurry." "Good," Margaret said. "That gives us time to prepare." The preparation was unlike anything Emily had ever seen. The women who knew about weapons taught the others. Patricia and her engineering team designed new equipment that bent or broke several dozen galactic regulations. Former military personnel like Margaret organized training schedules and tactical plans. Emily found herself learning how to operate a plasma rifle while helping to plan supply routes. The scientist in her was fascinated by the efficiency of the organization. The mother in her just wanted to get to Lucy as fast as possible. "We're not going to follow their rules," Margaret announced during one of their evening briefings. "The Corvians expect us to behave like civilized people. They expect diplomatic protests and careful negotiations. They're wrong." A newer arrival, someone named Janet whose daughter was also on New Haven, raised her hand. "What about the Galactic Council? Won't they condemn us for breaking the treaty?" Margaret's smile was cold. "Let them. Our children are being held by aliens on a planet far from home. Do you really care what some council thinks about our methods?" The murmur of agreement was immediate and fierce. By the end of 2 weeks, they had 17 ships and 12,000 women. The ships were converted cargo haulers and civilian transports, now armed with weapons that Patricia's team had built in secret. The women came from every profession: doctors, teachers, engineers, farmers, factory workers. What they all shared was the same expression Emily had seen in the mirror that first morning. "Final briefing tonight," Margaret announced. "We leave tomorrow." Emily packed her few belongings and checked her equipment one more time. In her bag was the last picture Lucy had sent her, the purple flower that looked like a butterfly. Soon she would see her daughter again. The Corvians had no idea what was coming for them. Commander Thexanael was reviewing supply reports when his tactical officer called out in alarm. "Sir, we have 17 ships dropping out of hyperspace. Unknown configuration heading directly for us." Thexanael looked up from his desk and walked to the main display. The approaching vessels looked strange. They were clearly civilian ships, cargo haulers and passenger transports, but something was different about them. Metal plates had been welded to their hulls, and weapon ports had been cut into their sides. "Are they responding to communications?" he asked. "No, sir. They're maintaining radio silence." This was puzzling. The human government hadn't sent any messages about a rescue fleet. These ships didn't match any known military designs. Thexanael studied the formation as they approached. It made no tactical sense. They were spread out randomly with no apparent command structure. "Sir, they're beginning to attack, but..." The tactical officer's voice trailed off in confusion. "But what?" "They're not targeting our ships, sir. They're firing at the planet." Thexanael stared at the display in shock. The human ships were bombarding the civilian areas of New Haven power plants, communication towers, even the small museum in the town center. This violated every rule of civilized warfare he had ever learned. "Open a communication channel," he ordered. "All frequencies." The main screen flickered, and a human woman's face appeared. She was middle-aged, with short gray hair and cold eyes that seemed to look right through him. Behind her, other humans worked frantically at weapon controls. "I am Commander Thexanael of the Corvian Fleet," he said, following standard diplomatic protocol. "You are attacking civilian targets in violation of the Universal War Crimes Treaty. Please explain your actions. The woman stared at him for a long moment before speaking. My name is Margaret Thompson. You have something that belongs to us. The human young ones are safe and well cared for, Thexanel replied, confused by her directness. They are being protected according to Article 7 of the treaty. They will be returned to their families when our governments reach an agreement about the territorial dispute. Margaret's expression didn't change. You don't understand. We're not diplomats. We're not your government. We're mothers and you took our children. But they are unharmed, Thexanel insisted. We have medical staff caring for them. They are fed 3 times a day. They have games and entertainment. We are following every rule for the treatment of civilian populations. I don't care about your rules, Margaret said quietly. Return our children now or we'll show you what real monsters look like. The communication channel closed. Seconds later, something began broadcasting on all frequencies that made Thexanel's blood run cold. It was audio recordings of young Corvian voices, children crying for their parents, calling out in fear and loneliness. The recordings were old, probably taken from cultural exchanges years ago, but the effect was immediate and terrible. Sir, how do they have recordings of our young ones? His communications officer asked, his voice shaking. Thexanel didn't answer. He was watching the tactical display as the human ships continued their attack on civilian infrastructure. Every power grid on the planet went dark. The communication arrays were reduced to twisted metal. Even the small library in the town square was destroyed, its ancient books scattered to the wind. Sir, they're demanding surrender of our ground forces, his tactical officer reported. This is impossible, Thexanel muttered. No civilized species behaves this way. His fleet was powerful, 12 modern warships against 17 converted civilian vessels. But the humans weren't fighting like any enemy he had studied. They seemed to care nothing for their own safety, ramming his ships when their weapons ran out. They targeted anything that might cause fear or confusion rather than focusing on military objectives. Worst of all, they kept broadcasting those recordings of Corvian children crying. Sir, the humans are sending another message. A different woman appeared on the screen this time. She had kind eyes and spoke softly like a teacher or a doctor. Commander, my name is Emily Watson. My daughter Lucy is 10 years old. She likes to draw pictures of flowers. She's scared right now, sitting in that school, wondering why her mother isn't coming to help her. Thexanel found himself leaning forward. This woman seemed more reasonable than the first one. Emily continued in the same gentle voice, I'm a scientist. I study plant genetics. I've never hurt anyone in my life. But if you don't return my daughter, I will personally come down to that planet and show you things that will give you nightmares for the rest of your life. The screen went dark. Sir, his tactical officer said quietly, they're not behaving like any species in our databases. Their attack patterns make no sense. They're destroying things that have no military value. Thexanel watched as another of his ships took heavy damage. The humans had modified their civilian vessels into weapons that broke every rule of space combat. They used suicide attacks, psychological warfare, and targeted civilian infrastructure without hesitation. Sir, we're receiving a message from the ground forces. The human mothers are broadcasting directly to our soldiers, telling them that their own families will be targeted if they don't surrender. That's impossible. Humans don't even know where our home worlds are. They're providing detailed information about our colonies, sir. Names, locations, family members of our soldiers. I don't know how they got this intelligence. Thexanel felt something he had never experienced in 20 years of military service, real fear. Not fear of death in battle, but fear of something that operated outside all the rules he understood. Sir, what are your orders? He looked at the tactical display one more time. 3 of his ships were heavily damaged. The humans showed no signs of stopping their brutal assault. And somewhere down on the planet, 847 human children were waiting for these women to come get them. Signal the ground forces, he said quietly. Begin preparation for evacuation of all prisoners. Sir? We're giving them back their young ones. The Galactic Council chamber buzzed with angry voices as representatives from dozens of species demanded answers. Ambassador Veltar struck his ceremonial gavel again and again, trying to restore order to the chaos. The evidence is clear, shouted Councillor Zexanel, his gray skin flushed with rage. The humans violated 47 separate articles of the Universal War Crimes Treaty. They targeted civilian infrastructure. They used psychological warfare. They threatened non-combatant populations. They destroyed a museum, added Representative Kixera from the Hive Worlds. A museum. Cultural sites are sacred under Article 12. They broadcast recordings of our children crying, Zexanel continued. That is torture of the cruelest kind. Ambassador James Mitchell stood calmly at the defendant's podium in the center of the chamber. He had listened to 2 hours of accusations without speaking, his hands folded quietly in front of him. Around him, holographic displays showed evidence of the attack on New Haven: burning buildings, damaged ships, and frightened Corvian soldiers surrendering to human mothers armed with improvised weapons. The human species must be expelled from civilized space immediately, declared Counselor Thexanael, who had been promoted after his humiliating defeat at New Haven. They cannot be trusted to follow basic rules of warfare. Veltar finally managed to quiet the chamber. Ambassador Mitchell, you have heard the charges against your species. The evidence of treaty violations is overwhelming. How do you respond? Mitchell looked around the chamber slowly, meeting the eyes of representatives who had welcomed humanity just months before. Then he smiled, not with humor, but with the patient expression of someone about to explain something very simple to very confused people. Honorable Council, he began, his voice carrying easily across the vast chamber. You have made a fundamental error in your understanding of human behavior. What error? Veltar demanded. Your people agreed to our terms. You signed the treaty. Yes, we did, Mitchell agreed. And under normal circumstances we follow those rules completely. Human military forces have never violated the treaty in any conflict with your species. Our diplomats respect your protocols. Our traders honor your commercial agreements. Then explain the attack on our forces, Zexanel interrupted. Mitchell's expression grew serious. You made one simple mistake, Counselor. You assumed that our mothers would follow your rules when you threatened their children. The chamber fell completely silent. Even the usual background hum of translation devices seemed to stop. I don't understand, Veltar said slowly. Mitchell walked to the center of the chamber, his voice growing stronger. Every species represented here has evolved beyond the primitive drive to protect young at any cost. You've developed complex brains that can weigh consequences, consider long-term effects, and follow rules even in emotional situations. You've become civilized. He paused, looking around the chamber again. Human mothers are different. When their children are threatened, millions of years of evolution take over. They don't think about treaties or consequences or proper behavior. They think about one thing only, getting their babies back. But surely rational thought. Veltar began. There is no rational thought, Mitchell interrupted. A human mother whose child is in danger will abandon every rule of civilization without hesitation. She will lie, cheat, steal, and kill to bring that child home. She will destroy anything that stands in her way. And she will do it all with a smile on her face. Counselor Yexera from the peaceful world spoke up. But this is barbaric. How can an intelligent species behave this way? Mitchell turned to face her. Because intelligence has nothing to do with it. This is instinct, pure and simple. When you took those children, you weren't dealing with the human government or our military or our diplomats. You were dealing with something much older and much more dangerous. He gestured to the holographic displays showing the aftermath of the battle. The women who came to New Haven weren't soldiers. Emily Watson is a plant scientist. Margaret Thompson used to be military, but she runs a small security business now. Patricia Davies designs civilian electronics. But when their children were taken, they became something else entirely. What did they become? Veltar asked quietly. Hunters, Mitchell said simply. For millions of years, human mothers have protected their young from predators, starvation, disease, and death itself. They have fought wild animals with their bare hands. They have walked through fire to save their children. They have died rather than abandon them. The chamber remained silent as Mitchell continued. You treated those children well. You fed them, gave them medical care, kept them safe. By any civilized standard, you were model captors. But you made one fatal error, you kept them away from their mothers. So what are you saying? Zexanael demanded. That humans cannot be trusted to follow any agreements? I'm saying that if you want to maintain your civilized approach to warfare, you need to understand what you're dealing with. Human fathers will follow your rules. Human soldiers will respect your treaties. Human governments will negotiate in good faith. Mitchell's voice dropped to almost a whisper, but every being in the chamber heard him clearly. But human mothers don't care about your civilization. They don't care about your rules. They don't care about consequences or politics or proper behavior. When you threaten their children, you are not dealing with rational beings. You are dealing with a force of nature that will not stop until their babies are safe. The silence stretched on for long minutes before Veltar finally spoke. "What do you propose we do with this information?" Mitchell smiled again, this time with genuine warmth. "Simple. Add one rule to your treaty. Never, under any circumstances, should human children be placed in potential danger during military operations. Because if you do, their mothers will come for them. And when they do, all your civilized rules of warfare become meaningless." 3 weeks later, Amendment 847 was added to the Universal War Crimes Treaty. The official language was diplomatic and proper, but the unofficial translation spread quickly through military academies across the galaxy. Humans make excellent allies and peaceful neighbors. But never ever mess with their kids.